Go ahead and think for a minute. Maybe comment down below if you want. Did you ever have an imaginary friend? How well do you remember them? What kind of details or adventures stand out in your mind? How did your family have to change their behavior just to suit this figment of your imagination? I know personally, my grandfather always had to stop himself from tripping over my little Daisy. Seriously, think of how you've revered the characters of your younger mind, or how it's even changed you as a person. Now, assuming that you're an adult and probably don't entertain this adolescent pastime, has it occurred to you that you're intentionally engaging with other people's imaginary friends? Wait, what? Well, I'm going to take a large leap of faith that you've probably watched a TV series or a movie recently. Hell, maybe there's a book on your nightstand waiting to devour all of your attention right before bed. And here's the simple truth about these mediums. Somebody else invented those characters. They aren't real. Or are they?
Writing a novel is like building a little campfire on an empty, dark plain. And one by one, these characters come out of the dark, and each one has a little pile of wood, and they put it on the fire. And if you're very lucky, before the fire goes out, it's this big bonfire, and all the characters stand around it and warm themselves. And that's the way it's always been for me.
Now, I personally prefer Dean Koontz, but I rather doubt there's anyone watching this video who hasn't heard of Stephen King. You've likely read one of his many books, or maybe you've watched one of the movie adaptations. Given King's insane popularity, I'm probably in a teeny tiny minority of the population. Oh, I read one of his books. I even really enjoyed it. But it wasn't any of his classics that were later adapted into movies, or even one of his short stories. Nope, of his 83 published titles, the one book I've read by the King of Horror is on writing.
You serious?
Yep, of all his works, the one book I've read by King is his part memoir, part writing advice. While some would say that this particular volume is a bit overhyped, it does give some unique insight and detail into King's creative process and how he drew from reality for some of his most acclaimed work. Minus the drug benders, I'm afraid. For our purposes, we'll be focusing on his very first published novel, Carrie.
When he was going to college, my brother Dave worked summers as a janitor at Brunswick High, his old alma mater. For part of one summer, I worked there too. I got paired with a guy named Harry, who wore green fatigues, a big keychain, and walked with a limp. Quite a raconteur was my pal Harry. One day, he and I were supposed to scrub the rust stains off the walls in the girls' shower. I looked around the locker room with the interest of a Muslim youth who for some reason finds himself deep within the women's quarters. It was the same as the boys' locker room, and yet completely different. There were no urinals, of course, and there were 2 extra metal boxes on the tile walls, unmarked and the wrong size for paper towels. I asked what was in them. "Pussy plugs," Harry said, "for them certain days of the month." I also noticed that the showers, unlike those in the boys' locker room, had chrome U-rings with pink plastic curtains attached. You could actually shower in privacy. I mentioned this to Harry, and he shrugged. I guess young girls are a bit more shy about being undressed. This memory came back to me one day while I was working at the laundry, and I started seeing the opening scene of a story. Girls showering in a locker room where there were no U-rings, pink plastic curtains, or privacy. And this one girl starts to have her period, only she doesn't know what it is, and the other girls, grossed out, horrified, amused, start pelting her with sanitary napkins, or with tampons, which Harry had called pussy plugs. The girl begins to scream, all that blood. She thinks she's dying, that the other girls are making fun of her even when she's bleeding to death. She reacts, fights back. But how? I'd read an article in Life magazine some years before, suggesting that at least some reported poltergeist activity might actually be telekinetic phenomena, telekinesis being the ability to move objects just by thinking about them. There was some evidence to suggest that young people might have such powers, the article said, especially girls in early adolescence, right around the time of their first pow. Two unrelated ideas, adolescent cruelty and telekinesis, came together, and I had an idea.
Later, King goes on to explain his process for drawing on two real-life girls he'd known.
Digging back to my memories of high school, remembering what I knew about the two loneliest, most reviled girls in my class, how they looked, how they acted, how they were treated. Very rarely in my career have I explored more distasteful territory. I'll call one of these girls Sandra. She and her mother lived in a trailer home not too far from me with their dog, Cheddar Cheese. She had no friends except for Cheddar Cheese, I guess. One day, her mother hired me to move some furniture. Dominating the trailer's living room was a nearly life-sized crucified Jesus, eyes turned up, mouth turned down, blood dribbling from beneath the crown of thorns on his head. He was naked except for a rag twisted around his hips and loins. Above this bit of breech clout were the hollowed belly and the jutting ribs of a concentration camp inmate. It occurred to me that Sandra had grown up beneath the agonal gaze of this dying god, and doing so had undoubtedly played a part in making her what she was when I knew her, a timid and homely outcast who went scuttling through the halls of Lisbon High like a frightened mouse. The other girl I'll call Dodie Franklin, only the other girls called her Dodo or Doo-Doo. Dodie and her brother Bill wore the same stuff every day for the first year and a half of high school. Black pants and short-sleeved checked sports shirt for him, a long black skirt, gray knee socks, and a sleeveless white blouse for her. Dodie's sleeveless white blouse began to grow yellow with wear, age, and accumulated sweat stains. As it grew thinner, the straps of her bra showed through more and more clearly. The other girls made fun of her, at first behind her back and then to her face. Teasing became taunting. The girls didn't just laugh at Dodie, they hated her too. Dodie was everything they were afraid of. After Christmas vacation of our sophomore year, Dodie came back to school resplendent. The dowdy old black skirt had been replaced by a cranberry-colored one that stopped at her knees instead of halfway down her shins. The tatty knee socks had been replaced by nylon stockings, which looked pretty good. The ancient sleeveless blouse had given way to a soft wool sweater. She'd even had a permanent. Dodie was a girl transformed, and you could see by her face that she knew it. The teasing that day was worse than ever. Her peers had no intention of letting her out of the box they'd put her in. She was punished for even trying to break free. I saw her smile fade, saw the light in her eyes first dim and then go out. By the end of the day, she was the girl she'd been before Christmas vacation, a dough-faced and freckle-cheeked wraith, scurrying through the halls with her eyes down and her books clasped to her chest.
And finally, how this culminated in the character Carrie and what her lasting impact on him was.
I never liked Carrie, that female version of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, but through Sandra and Dodie, I came at last to understand her a little.
Society is unlikely to remember the girls King took his inspiration from. Hell, we'll all probably forget their names as soon as this video ends. Yet references to Carrie can be found again and again throughout culture.
Remember how Bender dumped all that pig's blood on me?
People have discussed Carrie even if they've never read the books or watched the film adaptations. Her experiences talked about widely, the ideas and the sorrow in her story debated over and over. Carrie has about as much physical substance in this world as Santa Claus.
I'm in big trouble.
But just as St. Nick brings overwhelming anticipation and excitement to children around the world, Carrie continues to probe people's minds and emotions. I would bet money that she's made a lot more people rethink bullying than any of our high school's crappy PSAs.
This is bullying, and it's not okay.
Bullying?
There are even articles and video essays dedicated to mental health, abuse, and writing, all using Carrie as an example. Carrie White and her impact on this world will be here long after her creator or the two girls who inspired her. Hell, without her, we might not know the name of King. There may have never been a Shining or an It, Though, let's be real, we could all do with less killer clowns. Even now, she's changing your life this very moment. In Stephen King's quest to understand, he's created one scared little girl who has now reshaped the world. And King's experience is far from unique. Works by Shakespeare or Mark Twain have shifted the world long after their authors have departed it. Many of us forced to read their work under duress during high school, only to develop new ideas after the fact. Well, a large part of the reason I'm an author was because a high school teacher was obsessed with Mark Twain, like to the point that other students painted murals of him chatting with the famous author. In this tangible way, the works of Mark Twain actually changed the landscape of the world. For all I know, my teacher might not have gone into education without Twain. That teacher's passion was so infectious that I took every class he taught, which led me to reading an old Irish essay on the famines, which led me to write a book about an Irish vamper, which has led to signing events and speaking engagements, and you watching this video. Okay. I think you get my point. I'm obviously not suggesting that Captain America will jump out of the screen next time you watch an Avenger flick, or that you'll actually fall down Alice's rabbit hole into an alternate universe. But what am I suggesting exactly? What's the point I'm driving at? In his book Stolen Focus, Johann Ari interviews several experts, including Raymond Marr, on various forms of focus. Marr makes the argument for literature and empathy during an interview.
While we're reading, we're directing attention outward towards the words on the page, and at the same time, enormous amounts of attention is going inward as we imagine and mentally simulate. It's different from if you just close your eyes and try to imagine something off the top of your head. It's being structured, but our attention is in a very unique place. When you read fiction, in particular, you imagine what it's like to be another person. You find yourself, he says, trying to understand the different characters, their motivations, their goals. It's a form of practice. We're probably using the same kinds of cognitive processes that we would use to understand our real peers in the real world.
So basically, without reading fiction, we become Karens. Kind of explains a lot, doesn't it? The question of how real fiction and the imagination are was brought to my attention many years ago, before I started writing or publishing any of my own work. And it came from... Okay, yes, South Park is known for some poignant commentary, with its less than subtle humor. But this wasn't one of those political or even socially topical episodes. This particular nugget of wisdom came from their 3-part episode, Imagination Land. Spoilers, I guess. But for context, the imagination is real. It's in an alternate dimension which terrorists have attacked. And now the US government is debating on bombing it to get our imaginations under control. No, I'm not kidding. That is actually the plot. In this crazy world building that only Matt Stone and Trey Parker could develop, there is this even deeper debate as to whether or not the imagination is real, which of course culminates in one of the characters giving a speech about what they've learned today.
It's all real. Think about it. Haven't Luke Skywalker and Santa Claus affected your lives more than most real people in this room? I mean, whether Jesus is real or not, he's had a bigger impact on the world than any of us have. And the same can be said for Bugs Bunny and Superman and Harry Potter. They've changed my life, changed the way I act on the earth. Doesn't that make them kind of real? They might be imaginary, but they're more important than most of us here. And they're all gonna be around long after we're dead. So in a way, those things are more realer than any of us.
This is all so obvious, but how true is it, really? Coming back to Marr's interview in Stolen Focus, Hari ends the interview by asking Marr why he has spent so much time studying the effects of reading fiction on our minds. Marr's answer was actually surprisingly sweet.
Before I say goodbye to Raymond, I asked him why he had spent so much time studying the effects of reading fiction on human consciousness. Up to the moment when I asked this, he had been something of a data geek, explaining his methods in great detail, but as he answered, his face opened up. We're all on the same ball of mud and water that is heading towards a catastrophic end, potentially. If we're going to solve these problems, we can't do it alone, he said. That's why I think empathy is so valuable.
Basically, Hari and Marr are making the point that in reading fiction, our focus goes into empathizing with another person's experience. That by doing this, we strengthen our ability to understand one another and see an alternative perspective. In this same book, Hari references a rather powerful Buddhist quote that inspired this whole video essay. Even one of the largest religions recognizes the power of empathy and, by extension, reading. Of course, Buddhism came around a couple thousand years before the invention of fiction in film. In a more analog version, humans have always told stories around campfires. And we still do this today, though those campfires have largely been replaced by caramel macchiatos.
Is there whiskey in this? Oh yeah, that's mine.
In this way, we are all bards spreading our tales and anecdotes. Why? Why are we so compelled to tell stories? Especially ones so fantastic or mythical as often found in the words of Tolkien, King, or Gaiman. What drives me and others like me to weave these complex imaginary tales, sometimes editing and revising them several times over years? What compels you to purchase a book, dedicating hours, days, or even weeks to reading these modern myths? Some might say well-formed, habit-driven marketing, and that's definitely a topic we'll get into another time. Hey, subscribe and ring the bell if you want to see that video. But that marketing wouldn't work without the initial habit. Even putting literature aside, our species is wired to consume stories. Be it movies, TV shows, music, or even video games. We all feel this urge to learn about the experiences of people who aren't physically here. Again, I was confronted with this question later by fellow indie author Nicole McEwen, who described an eerily familiar experience.
Having written books, I have experienced that myself, where the character says or does something that I hadn't necessarily expected as I was writing.
I too have been writing a scene, and my characters suddenly start doing things that make me sit back, confused. My fingers moved over the keys. My brain must have spawned this moment. Yet, I didn't see it coming, and I usually can't bring myself to change it. When I wrote my first novel, Blood Herring, I was certain this would be one book, a standalone. Yet I reached the end and discovered my characters had other plans. Now it's a trilogy with more than a few companion novellas. The characters will not shut up. Even more recently, I had a critique partner ask why my zombie western is written in present tense first person. And my honest response was, the character made me do it.
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
This, of course, spawned a whole debate about plotting versus pantsing that I will save for another time. But suffice to say that not every writer agreed with me on this regard. Still, enough of them said something very similar to Nicole.
I see this question get asked in writers' groups all the time, or people will even bring up things like, I had this great idea for something to happen in the plot, but my characters just won't do it. All kinds of crazy stuff that kind of makes us as writers feel like these characters really have some say over their destiny, which is crazy considering that they're made up inside our heads.
But this is just one big whataboutism woo-woo thought experiment, right? It's not like fiction has changed the world in any physical way. Well, how many of you are watching this very video on a phone or tablet? Because in 1973, Martin Cooper invented the first mobile phone. Sure, none of us could have watched a video on one of those bricks, but I think we can all agree that was the start. And who did Cooper credit but Star Trek?
One day, during a break from his heavy schedule of pondering, Marty happened upon an episode of Star Trek and a piece of 23rd century technology that would change his life and take the whole world with it.
Hi, Captain.
And suddenly, there's Captain Kirk talking on his communicator. Talking with no dialing. That was not a fantasy to us, although to the rest of the world it was.
So, due to the wild and often cheesy imaginings of writer Gene Roddenberry in a campy show over 50 years ago, many of you are now able to watch this very video anywhere. And that is the very real power of storytelling. But what do you think? Is this all just some hippie nonsense? Am I some yuppie idiot? Or did the memories of you having tea with fake pirates have a discernible impact on your day as a child? Thanks for your time today. If you found this interesting, please like and share. My channel is super small and it can only grow with your support. And if you're interested in a vampire buddy cop mystery, the first 4 chapters of Blood Herring are available on my channel or by scanning the code on the screen. Happy writing!